This is episode 183 with sports psychology PhD, certified mental performance consultant, and someone who's worked with Olympians and 4-year-olds, Dr. Duncan Simpson. Welcome to the Strength Running Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jason Fitzgerald, and the episode you're about to listen to features mindset strategies to help you focus and avoid distraction from sports psychology PhD Duncan Simpson. He's worked with athletes in multiple sports, from youth to Olympians, and has fundamental insights on mental skills that are going to help you improve your mindset around running. Before we start, I want to make sure we're all hurdling the same barrier. On this show, you can expect conversations between me and the thought leaders in the running industry, the coaches, performance psychologists, elite athletes, registered dietitians, authors, and physical therapists who can help you elevate your running to new heights. Because when you better understand the process of improvement, when you recognize knowledge as a competitive advantage, you'll be a wiser and more productive athlete. By the way, the Strength Running YouTube channel has tens of thousands of subscribers and hundreds of videos on weightlifting for runners, mindset training, how to run with better form, and a lot more. Search us on YouTube, subscribe, and you'll see every video we publish on a weekly basis. And of course, if you've never visited our website, this is where it all began, strengthrunning.com. For more than 10 years, we've been helping runners level up their training, race faster, prevent more injuries, and get stronger. You'll find our award-winning blog, our free email courses, and the full library of training programs and coaching services to help you accomplish your biggest running goals. We couldn't have made this episode without our sponsor, Elemental Labs. They make high-sodium electrolytes for athletes to help manage your hydration needs. And check this out. They're doing something awesome for Strength Running Podcast listeners. You can get a free Element sample pack. You just have to cover the cost of shipping, which is only $5 for US customers. Go to drinklmnt.com/strengthrunning to see all the details and claim your free electrolytes today. Each sample pack includes 8 packets of Element salt, 2 citrus, 2 raspberry, 2 orange, and 2 unflavored packets. That's drinklmnt.com/strengthrunning to sign up. Our guest today is Dr. Duncan Simpson, the Director of Personal Development at IMG Academy in Florida, which is what he describes as the Disneyland for sports. I definitely want to go. He's worked with young children, high school students, and professional and Olympic athletes in a whole range of sports. He was formerly an associate professor in the sport, exercise, and performance program at Barry University. He's also a certified consultant with the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. He joins us to talk about focus. This is often a misunderstood mental skill, and Duncan believes it's one of the most valuable. After all, if you can't focus, it doesn't matter how confident or mentally tough you might be. Our discussion focuses on short and long-term focus, how to avoid external distractions, but also internal distractions in your mind, and strategies to help you work on this skill during your training. Brain training is such an amazing performance multiplier that has virtually no drawbacks, but huge potential. I hope you take advantage of Duncan's expertise, and if you'd like to go deeper, we have a free series you can sign up for at strengthrunning.com/brain. Without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Duncan Simpson. Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Jason. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you. I think it's going to be interesting because of your background and where you work. And I think that's a good place to start. Let's talk a little bit more about where you work, because it's a very unique place that does quite a few different things. So how would you describe IMG and what you do at IMG?
Yeah, great place to start. Some people have kind of called it like the Disneyland for sports, even though Disney now has its own kind of sports area. But at IMG Academy, we're based in Bradenton, Florida, and we are a large sports academy. We're a developmental academy, so it's really high school age athletes. We have approximately 1,200 student athletes, spread across 8 different sports. It was founded by Nick Bollettieri, the famous tennis coach, and we started with tennis and then transitioned into golf, and now we have 8 sports, including track and field. And my day-to-day role now has changed a little bit. I'm the director of personal development. So what that means is I oversee the mental conditioning department, where we have 12 mental coaches, and the leadership department, where we have 4 leadership coaches. So I oversee those 2 departments. And we sit underneath athletic and personal development, which includes sports science, athletic training, and strength and conditioning. So we're kind of a holistic support mechanism around the student athletes. Couple more things that may be of interest. We have 80 plus different nationalities on campus, and about 50% of our student athletes are international. So we have a real diversity of a student body, and most of them are living away from home. So it's a unique place, and no day is ever the same.
That's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like how your job is so holistic in nature, as you mentioned. It seems like you really don't just focus on these kids as just athletes. You see them as full people, who need to be developed as full people. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because, you're the director of personal development, and that does seem like an interesting title. I don't think I've ever heard it before. Can we talk a bit more about that holistic nature of developing not just an athlete, but a person?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with our population, we're working with high school athletes. And I think you have a duty of care. And our duty of care is to look after the athlete, but more importantly, look after the person. It's such an important age in adolescence where we need to make sure that they're developing the right way. Our job is to prepare them really for the next level. While some of our athletes may go professional straight out of high school, that's a very, very small number based on, sports. We may have some in tennis and golf, but really the other sports, it's preparing them for college, preparing them, down the road, maybe for professional. But really, the reality is, even though we place about 60% of our student athletes will graduate into Division I sports, and about 90% plus will go into Division I, 2, or 3, which is incredible. We know most of them will not go professional. So our duty of care is to really make sure we develop the whole well-rounded person. So if you think about it, Jason, we have really 4 dimensions to campus. I'd say we have the sports themselves, the 8 sports. We have athletic and personal development that I fall under. We have campus life, which is kind of the boarding, the residential support network, and then we have the school. So we have those 4 areas. So while, yes, I'm the director of personal development under athletic and personal development, we have coaches that support, we have tutors, we have campus life, we have the teachers and the coaches. We have everybody around the athletes to hopefully, ensure they have, maximize their athletic success. But more importantly, I think, is to make sure that they develop well-rounded as a well-rounded human being, and we prepare them to excel in college if that's their next chosen step.
This sounds fun. I'm going to be on the next flight. I think I want to go to the Disneyland of sports. Well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about some specific mental skills, because I think that you're working with such an interesting group of people, high school aged athletes who are definitely, they're at the beginning of this developmental journey. And like you said, you have this responsibility of care. And at this age, I do think it's more important to develop some of those foundational habits, some of those, fundamental mindsets around sport to really help them excel, whether that's at the college level or maybe even at the pro level, even though only a small percentage of your athletes will make it there. But, of all the different mental skills that athletes might be interested in developing, from, mental toughness to anxiety management, I know that you've said in the past that focus is the most important mental skill. Why is that, Duncan?
It is a good question. There's definitely people that may push back on me on that. But I really think in order to perform whatever task we're doing in life, we can be confident, we can manage our emotions, but literally task specific, if we're not focused on the right thing at the right time, then we're not going to be able to execute the skill right in front of us. If I take emotional management, for example, it's interconnected with focus. If I'm super hyper aware of my emotions, then I'm also directing an internal focus, and there's a biological part to this, but I'm directing my focus internally on how I'm feeling, as opposed to necessarily externally on my task. So I think focus plays in and connects every other piece. But in order to maximize any execution of a skill, whether it's hitting a ball or whether it's throwing or whether it's running, we still have to be able to focus on the task at hand. So that's why I think focus is the most important. And it's also one of the ones that's the simplest, but also the most tricky. And I know I'm kind of contradicting myself there, but our ability to focus singly on one task is challenging. Looking at, all the challenges, all the possible distractions that we could have in a competitive environment, being distracted is very easy. And we see that every single day. And I'm sure we can all attest to that. Just, trying to listen to something, trying to do any kind of task, it's so easy to get distracted.
Yeah. And just as you were talking, my watch buzzed to tell me that I had, burned the number of calories that I should be burning today. I don't even know if I had that function set up. So yes, let's talk about distractions, as I'm currently being distracted right now. I'd love to talk about distractions in a potentially bigger way than just, the lore of your Instagram app on your phone, or, someone off in the stands who might be heckling you, as you're running a track race or something like that. But really larger distractions that can eat up much more of your time over the long term. So maybe long-term distractions. How do you think about managing distractions for, high performance athletes?
Yeah, I think distractions is a good question, Jason. I think they're really contextual, and it's important to identify in each context where do your distractions lie. And I think it is contextual and it's individualized. So if I take an athlete, some athletes are going to get easily distracted by a crowd, and some athletes, they won't even recognize there's a crowd there. Some will get distracted very easily from an internal emotional point of view. Some athletes won't. So I think for athletes themselves, it's recognizing in each context, whether I'm sat talking to someone, whether I'm in a classroom, whether I'm at work, whether I'm actually in the performance environment, what tend to be my attentional thieves. We talk to our athletes about what steals your attention, what takes it away, what are the things that distract you the most. So unless we know what those are, then we can't even start on a plan of managing those if we don't have that self-awareness. So it really is a self-awareness exercise. So myself, and I will maybe get onto this, I practice mindfulness every morning. And for me, my attention is stolen all the time by my internal thoughts. I continuously get distracted. In a performance environment, it's less so about internal, it's more about external, what's going on in my performance environment. So I think everybody needs to raise awareness about what distracts you, and then kind of taking a deep dive into, well, why is that distraction for you? So if the crowd, for example, is a distraction, well, what is it? What are the things about a crowd? Why is that distracting for you? Is it about, a fear of failure in front of other people? Is it just the sound? Is it trying to impress other people in the crowd? What is it about the crowd? So then we can dig a little deeper and we can perhaps tease apart some of those things and break down why that distraction is occurring.
Yeah, that reminds me of when I ran the Boston Marathon in 2014. It was 1 year after the bombings at Boston, and there were, I believe, double the number of fans alongside the course. And I remember being incredibly distracted by being yelled at for close to 3 hours. And that's not something that I was really used to, even though I had run, the New York City Marathon at that point. And I know for me, that is one of those very specific, unique distractions that I really don't like. I like to get in the zone and not really think about, the broader outside world. And that was really hard when there's hundreds of people yelling and cheering for you constantly. And so I just think that's really instructive to look back on your own training, your own performance experiences, and try to find out, where are those moments where you might get distracted. Can we talk about distractions that might not be external, but internal? Because, in the sport of running, it is such a mental game because you're very often alone with your thoughts for the entirety of the race. And it's one of those sports where, you're not really communicating with teammates. And so a lot of runners do get lost in their own head and they get distracted by, can I maintain this pace until the end of the race? Am I going to be able to finish strong and kick at the end? How do we kind of get out of our own heads and not be distracted by all those internal thoughts that might actually not be very productive?
Yeah, it is another good question, Jason. I think for athletes, it's about considering those internal dialogue. Is it taking me in the direction that I want, or is it taking me away from a direction? So is that inner dialogue helpful or hurtful? And I simplify that with athletes. It's not necessarily good or bad, but is this helping me in what I'm trying to do, or is it hurting me? So for example, what we tend to call negative self-talk, which would sound negative to a lot of people if we vocalized it. For some people, and again, I'm not advocating this, but for some people, they may actually use that as a form of motivation. They may use it and direct it, and they believe that it's directing them in a positive place. So, for example, if you've slipped behind your pacing time, you may kind of scold yourself a little bit, beat yourself up a little bit, but you're using it and it's directing the right way. So I'm not here to say you're right or wrong. It's just you're making that assessment. Is this inner dialogue putting me in the right direction, or is it not? So, for example, if we go out for a run, it's cold, it's wet, it's windy, and our internal dialogue is, this sucks. I need to go back to bed. Like, why am I doing this? Is this, this is pointless, blah, blah. Like, that's not taking us in a direction that's going to be beneficial to us. So I think it's, again, the internal dialogue, just like the distractions, it's raising your own self-awareness about what that internal dialogue is and what tend to be our patterns in our internal dialogue. And again, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And when I frame it helping or hurting, we can pretty much understand that dichotomy and then say, okay, well, if it's continuously hurting me, then I really need to change something. And it's not about, hey, I need to be positive about every situation and I need to speak positively to myself, but I can switch to neutral self-talk. I can more instructional in terms of, it may be, hey, all of a sudden my pace has dropped, but it may be in and around, hey, I've got to work on my technique a little bit. I'm slumping. I need to, change my gait, whatever it might be. So it's more instructional around the running as opposed to, hey, I got this, I can do this. And really, at times, and I've run marathons, like it really, it's really tough. And to find a positive is really difficult in certain moments, but you can always find, you don't have to be negative. And you can always find something that directs you in the direct, find something to verbalize or direct you in the way you want to be going.
Have you ever discovered with athletes that, when we are talking about this issue and how self-awareness is so important to it, actually being aware of where your focus is and when you get distracted and what is distracting you. Have you ever run into the problem that a lot of people just aren't self-aware enough to really be able to effectively answer those questions? And how do you help athletes become more self-aware so that, they can actually go through some of these exercises and really pinpoint those distractions and where they are, when they occur. And then, only then, can they really take some steps to mitigate that.
Yeah, and I work with athletes of all ages. I've worked with athletes as young as 4, as crazy as that sounds, and I've worked with athletes, into their 50s and 60s. So the level of maturity definitely plays in. The level of skill and ability they've reached. So, for example, if you take a top international junior tennis player, but they maybe reach top 10 in the world, they'll have incredible self-awareness, even if they are 15, 16, compared to your usual 15 and 16-year-old based on their competition level. I think drawing out some of that self-awareness, it really comes down to asking good questions, asking them to reflect on certain moments. I would say at times that I've also worked with athletes whereby that level of self-awareness is not super high, and that's also beneficial. So I've worked, for example, with golfers whereby I wouldn't say intelligence, that's the wrong term, but lower level of self-awareness, but they certainly were not particularly analytical, but that actually really helped them. So they didn't overanalyze. They kind of hit the shot. They thought about what they needed to do next, and they got on with it. They weren't over analytical. And for certain people, that's beneficial. I would say the majority of people were not. We need to aid self awareness in that mental process. Like if we don't understand our own mind, and how do we possibly make it work the best for us? So again, I think it's about asking good questions. Again, I think asking people to reflect, as it's a running podcast, and a lot of people do this anyway. We'll be keeping running journals or running logs. Would be to reflect upon the mindset piece of it after their run. We're going to put down pacing, we're going to put down mileage, maybe put down conditions, but what was going on? What were the things that were going on? What was the internal dialogue? What were some of the themes? And it may just be a couple of notes, but if you're training for, we've got a 16-week training block, you're going to see some consistency in terms of, that seems to be my pattern. And I think those that are experienced runners, you're out on the road by yourself a lot, then you end up having to know yourself. You will end up knowing yourself pretty well. Now, whether you like that person that you end up knowing is a different topic, but you do add that self-awareness. And I think that's honestly, from a therapeutic point of view, why running is very beneficial, because people can work through some of the challenges. They can reflect. At times, it's less technique orientated. If we're just going on a slow, long run, then it's less technique focused than perhaps track and field. So we can aid just that self-reflective process, and it can be very meditative. So again, I'm not sure if I quite hit all the points you're asking, Jason, but again, that kind of reflection, asking themselves questions, and then realizing that, sometimes self-awareness or lack of self-awareness can be beneficial in certain circumstances.
I do think it's incredibly useful to use your training log as not just a place where, you're writing in, the substitute for Strava. It's not just the amount you ran, the pace, the distance and all that. It's also how you felt, all of that subjective emotional feelings around, especially the harder things that you do, the workouts, the long runs, and even the races. I think it's really beneficial to actually almost write a little journal entry. How did you feel? What was your headspace like before, during, and after, the effort? And you can pick up a lot of different trends and things like that over time. And, over time, you will get to know yourself a little bit better. And I think that is a very actionable way to start incorporating, some of these lessons into your training, and to practice being more self-aware is to use that training log. If someone is new to sports psychology and they want to improve their focus, during a workout, they also want to stay focused for an entire season, and they want to stay focused on their running for year after year after year, because it's such a cumulative sport. I'm very curious to hear from you, Duncan. If you're just getting started with things and just getting started with working on mental skills like this, what are some of the classic mistakes? What are the frequent misconceptions that runners might have, or the traps they might fall into when they start incorporating some of these more self-awareness or mindfulness strategies within their training?
Yeah, I think there's a common misperception that, when we start that awareness, and we may not like what we hear, we may not like how we feel, we may not like the outcomes of our performances, that all of a sudden we self-identify that we're either mentally we're not good, and emotionally, I don't manage my emotions, or I'm not mentally tough. Whatever words you want to put around it, we can have that, especially that early perception if we struggle from a performance point of view. I think the reason I go there is that, I've been lucky enough to work with some pretty high level athletes, whether it's, top tennis players and some Olympians, and they still have a lot of the things we're talking about here that an absolute beginner will have. They still have the doubts. They still have the distractions. They still have those confidence issues. They have those. So over time and experience, do you learn to manage some of these things? Absolutely. But I think as a beginning athlete, it's recognizing that I tell my youth athletes all the time, and it is a cliche and it's a bumper sticker, but you're perfectly imperfect. That all of us have doubts. All of us come up with these challenges, and you're unique. And some of the listeners will struggle with anxiety more than others. Some will struggle with focus more than others. Some will struggle with confidence on one day and not the other day. And we don't get it. And we can get frustrated by it. But the reality is we're human beings. And just accepting that emotions are just part of that human experience. I talk to my athletes, like I can't get rid of your quote unquote negative or unhelpful emotions. We can learn to manage them a little bit, but we can't get rid of them. They're part of the human experience. If we could manage them, we'd all walk around being happy all day, but that's just not reality. So we have to manage that human experience and realize, hey, the lows and the really tough moments, the challenges when it's, you're doing your 20-mile run or whatever you might be doing, or hill sprints, and you feel the worst you possibly felt, like that's kind of the, part of that process and part of what makes the crossing the finish line the joyous part that it is, because we've been through the lows and we've been through the challenges. So I think it's just understanding, and I know this, may sound, kind of a little bit out there, but just if people just take a step back and realize that participation in physical activity, sport, that it's about an experience, and it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just like you're going to have different experiences. And I think athletes want to go in and feel great and have this amazing mindset the whole time. And that's just not realistic. So I think, being kind to yourself, understanding it's a process, understanding you'll get to know yourself a little bit better, understanding that we're all creatures that are a little bit different and a little bit quirky, and we're all perfectly imperfect, and just learning to understand yourself and what works best for you.
That's a good message. Be kind to yourself. I mean, running is so incredibly hard. I remember a conversation I had with one of the best marathoners here in the US, Noah Droddy, and he was talking about how you will have more bad runs than you will good runs, but that will make those good runs, those fantastic workouts where the effort feels effortless, so much better. And I couldn't agree more. But what happens if, we have a bad race, or we run a workout and we completely tank, or we bomb it, we don't hit the splits that we're supposed to? How do you recommend athletes refocus on the things that they can control after a poor performance? How do they get their head back on straight and, just get back into the game, as opposed to, wallowing and lacking the ability to then refocus on what they can actually do in their training to improve upon the bad performance they might have just had?
Yeah, I think for me, it's getting down to understanding and being honest in that self-reflection about what happened, and, breaking it down. Obviously it could be technical. It could be, weather related. It could be, fueling, hydration. It could be the mental part. Having an honest and in-depth understanding and breaking it down, not sticking your head in the sand, but what happened. We all know, if you've run a lot, that, some days you wake up, you've done everything right, you go out for a run and you just feel awful. And you can't quite pinpoint it. You're not quite sure why it happened. You've done your training great, you get to race day and it falls apart. But a lot of us don't really want to dig too deep into why that may be. Maybe we've overcooked it. Maybe we haven't recovered properly. Maybe our nutrition, our hydration, our sleep was a little bit off. So I think, honestly, trying to get to that answer. We may not always get to a concrete answer, an answer we're satisfied with, but I think reflection's the first key point. I think, how do we get back on the horse? I think the most important thing is preparation. So what are we doing in terms of setting ourselves up for success the next time we go back out? Confidence is built off preparation. So we need to make sure that we prepare properly from all the elements we talked about, the kind of the actual runs itself, the recovery, the nutrition, the hydration, the sleep. So we've got to make sure that we prepare properly. And then we have to be really cognizant of the story that we're telling ourselves. What is that inner dialogue? So those are the two big areas that confidence is based off, the preparation and also that internal dialogue. And I like to use that phrase of, what is the story I'm telling myself? Because I think we all create a story in our mind about why things are the way they are. So, for example, I had a bad race and it's, I'm just not mentally tough, or I'll never get this, or, I should have done this, this, and this. I knew my training was wrong. Whatever story we want to create around it, because we want to create a narrative of why things happen. So I think being aware of that inner dialogue and what is that story you're creating? And again, is that story helping me in a direction I want to go? Or is it taking me in a direction I don't want to go? So I look at those two things, preparation and then that inner dialogue, the story is being absolutely essential to kind of getting back on the horse proverbially.
Yeah. And I think the idea of looking back over a poor performance and really being honest with yourself on why that happened in the first place is incredibly valuable. And I think too that having someone else to talk things over with is probably just as important, because I think whether that's a coach, whether it's a training partner who understands you and your training and your running, they can really see other things that you can't see because you're so emotionally invested in your running. Everyone knows that we create stories that pat our ego on the back and make us, feel better about ourselves. Because I know as a coach, when I'm working with a lot of runners and, often when they have a bad workout or a race doesn't go the way that we want it to go, often the story that they have is different from the story that I have. And my reason for why they may not have performed as well might be very different from theirs. And I think that outside perspective is a very valuable thing to have on your training because it kind of gets you out of your own head. I know what I think about my running, but what does that other accomplished runner think? Or what does my coach think? And that can be a really interesting way of getting good feedback about your training, about a race performance that you might not have given yourself. And I think that's an interesting way to get that feedback too.
Yeah, I've got actually a real quick, great example of that. And probably some of the listeners will connect with this. My first ever marathon, I ran Nashville Marathon, and still probably the best shape I've ever gone into it. And then I trained by myself. I had a friend who was a sub-3 marathon runner that had helped me a lot with kind of the training plan. But I'd done all the training myself. I got to race day, and there was actually a few other people that I knew. And a guy who was a friend of a friend said, "Hey, do you want to run together?" And I was like, "Sure." It sounds like just a ridiculous thing now when I say it, but I was like, "Sure, I'll run with you." Not really thinking about pacing, not really thinking about I haven't done this. I haven't been training with somebody else. I haven't been worrying about somebody else. So, I go off and run with a friend of a friend, and it just ends up being the worst idea I could have possibly done because it just completely upset my pacing, my fueling, what I was trying to do. And again, I kind of afterwards, I was, oh man, I had such a terrible race. I just blew up, and I blew up halfway through, which had never happened in my training runs. And my friend was like, "Well, what happened?" I was like, "Yeah, well, I ran with it." And he was like, "You ran with someone else?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Well, there you go." It was just that simple, but I didn't realize it as a pretty inexperienced runner at the time. But more, it's like, well, that's not how you've been training. You've got to. So again, that simple reflection of speaking to someone who's an experienced runner or mentor, however you coach, whatever you want to pick, is absolutely important because, like you said, they're going to pick out things that you just won't realize. What are the mistakes I made? And there's always someone more experienced you can find to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, was the person you were running with, were they a 2:15 marathoner and you didn't know what you were getting yourself into?
Yeah, they were the elites right at the front, and I was just trying to run sub-4. But no, I mean, I don't think they were too far off, but they were definitely quicker than me. And it was just a bad idea. I was talking to people, and it's just not what I'd been doing. So it completely threw me off. And as a novice marathon runner, that's the worst thing. You have to be able to run your own race, and you have to be able to, manage a lot of things that go along with that first day, that first race experience that you've never had before. So, yeah, he wasn't a 2:15, but he was definitely quicker than me.
Well, my wife ran the Rock and Roll Nashville half marathon, and she said it was a very hilly course. So you probably, you were biting off a lot there. Well, Duncan, this has been really interesting, and I think the mental skill of focus is one that may not actually be very sexy when athletes think about it, but it's one of those skills that can really help you in the long term by making sure that you're focusing on the right thing at the right time. But what have I missed about this topic of focus? Is there anything else you'd like to add for our running listeners?
Yeah, I think we when I was in academia, I published a couple of studies. Did one on runners, long distance runners, and then some on ultra runners. And I think what we found is pretty interesting that at certain times it's very useful for runners to have their focus external. So external targets, continuously external. So for example, if we're really struggling internally through pain or struggling with emotions, is to externally focus on, and again, this is not revolutionary, but okay, what's my target? Okay, it's that next lamppost, it's that next tree, it's that next mile marker. Okay, I'm literally looking at that person in front of me. I'm watching the bottom of their shoes as they tick over. Like externally, what am I focusing on? Internally, what we found is the stronger runners, the more experienced runners, who are very used to pacing and kind of, if you think about the elites, they don't run with a watch in terms of race days. So they're very attuned to their body. They're very attuned to pacing. So when you become more experienced, those feelings are things internally you can focus on and you can manage. Okay, I'm running at this pace. If you're a novice and you say, what pace are you running at? Most novices have no idea. They could be completely off, especially on those race days. You're like, oh, I'm going at this pace. No, you're going like way, you're not going, 9-minute miles. You're going like 7.5. You don't even realize because of the adrenaline. But I think experienced runners can dial in internally. So I think a couple of things is to recognize the internal versus the external focus. I think one part of training that when we did a study and we looked at it that was very interesting was the environment in which you run. And I don't think that can be, isn't really talked about enough, but the aesthetics and also the enjoyment of training and training in a certain environment. We had people really articulate how much they love running out in nature, seeing wildlife, being away from the city, being outdoors, seeing, whether it's the ocean or trees, whatever it was, and really having that enjoyment and connection with nature was absolutely essential to their running experience. Now, we may not all have that, we may live in a city and we may be challenged by some of those, but I think being able to run out in nature, connect with nature is actually really important, especially from a training point of view. So I'd encourage the listeners, hey, where possible, is to pick runs and pick locations that you really enjoy and focus on it and soak in whether it's beautiful weather or it's, you're seeing wildlife or just a beautiful landscape, to really focus on those things, because that can really add to that joy of running, where sometimes it can get mundane in our training process. So selecting the environment in which you're training can also really impact our focus.
That just reminds me of when I was running in high school. It wasn't until my junior year that we started running on a lot of the conservation land in our town. And all of a sudden, we were running more mileage per week. We were having more fun. And it was just amazing because I knew that we were running more, but I was having more fun doing it because we were exploring all these trails that we had never seen before. And it was beautiful. I mean, we had wetlands and some woods, and it was just a really beautiful place to train. And it certainly does make the miles go by a little bit easier. There was one more thing that I wanted to touch on, Duncan, that I think is super valuable, that I think is getting lost in our modern world today. And that's with that idea of pacing and really knowing what different paces feel like. And you were saying how more experienced runners, more advanced runners do have a better intuitive feeling of what different paces feel like. And this just reminds me, when I was in college, our coach would not let us race with a watch. And there were some workouts where we didn't wear a watch either. And it was one of those things where at first it was so annoying. And, we were all trash talking my coach behind his back. We want our watches. Time is important in the sport of running. But after a while, we got really good at pacing ourselves. And my coach could say, get on the track and run a 5:45 mile or a 5:30 mile or a 5-minute mile. And we would know exactly what those different paces felt like. how the track felt under our legs, how the wind felt against our legs, what our respiration was like. And I think today, with everyone wearing a GPS watch, with everyone so obsessed with tracking every metric, you don't build that intuitive sense of pace anymore. And I think something is being lost there, because that is almost a form of intelligence, isn't it? An athletic intelligence specific to the sport of running that I think is so valuable. Besides not running with a watch, are there certain ways that we can, build that skill in our training?
Yeah, I think your points are really good on, Jason. And, we look at the best runners in the world, especially for long distance. I mean, they haven't historically grown up, pacing with watches and technology. And again, there's nothing wrong with technology. In fact, it's enhanced the field a lot in terms of running, and it's probably brought a lot of people to the sport. So there's nothing wrong with technology, but I think we can become slaves to that technology, and that the single numbers impact what we think, whether the session has been successful or not, and we can beat ourselves up if we haven't quite hit our pace time or our goal time, or as opposed to actually, at the end of the day, most of us are not going to win an Olympic medal. So what's it for? It's for health, it's for fitness, it's for enjoyment. So if it turns into that singular focus on a time, then we sometimes lose that enjoyment of the aesthetics. And I know when I, ran quite a bit, that I became one of those people who was just overly focused on my time. And I ended up just really not enjoying it for a while. And because I was trying to, hit a certain pacing time and a marathon goal time. And it's just like, at the end of the day, I was never really going to go anywhere in my running. Just like I was doing it because I enjoyed it, and it took my enjoyment away. So I think the other thing is to, I'm going to talk marathon running, but if you look at each of your runs, whether it's a long distance, whether it's race pace, whether it's sprint or hill training, I think going out and really writing down before you even go out what was useful is what is my clear purpose and intention for this run. And it's not just a physical, like I'm going to do, I need to hit this pace. I need to do this. It's, well, what's the purpose? Why am I doing this? And again, it can be race pace, etc., but really identifying an intention. And maybe your intention for certain days is I'm going to run with a smile on my face because I want to enjoy it. I get to do this. I'm very fortunate that this is a hobby that I can do. So I think just identifying a clear purpose for each run is, it really helped me with my training, especially when I got very orientated into time and stuff. And I was not an elite runner by any stretch. So I think just identifying a clear purpose for each run can really aid in that kind of just disconnection from just focusing singly on time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a coach, what I can say is the recovery run, the slowest running you're going to do all week, that is the run to ditch the watch, just run super easy, have fun, and you don't have to put any performance expectations on yourself. Well, Duncan, this was really interesting. I love learning about these mental skills and different ways that we can become more mentally fit athletes. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your time. If we want to follow along with you online or your work, where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks, Chase. Thanks for having me on. I'm relatively active on Twitter, and that's Sport Psych Dunk, DUNC. So that's really the best place. If people want to contact me via email, it's duncan.simpson@img.com. And those are probably the best two ways to get hold of me. And yeah, I'm happy to have some feedback and any questions anybody has.
Excellent. Thanks, Duncan. And I will include links to your social profiles and all of that in the show notes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
There we have it. I got so many valuable nuggets out of this conversation, and I know that if you apply just one or two of them, you'll notice the difference. If you found this episode helpful, a review on Apple Music or sharing this with your running group is so appreciated. Finally, I want to mention that our program, Mindset Mastery, has been updated with all new content. There's now ultra marathon plans for the 50K, the 50-mile, and the 100-mile distances. We have a new video on using humor to lighten the cognitive load of training, and also 2 worksheets on how to develop non-outcome oriented goals and more. Go to strengthrunning.com/mindset to see everything that's new. Finally, I want to hook you up with some free electrolytes. Our sponsor, Elemental Labs, is offering a free sample pack with 4 flavors and 8 packets at drinklmnt.com/strengthrunning. You only have to pay for shipping. Elemental Labs makes electrolytes for athletes and low-carb folks with no sugar, no artificial ingredients or colors, and I'm partial to the citrus flavor, which I honestly can't get enough of. It's tasty, it's delicious, and it's something that I really enjoy when I do any running more than, say, about 45 minutes. And there's actually now mounting evidence that the higher recommended sodium intake levels from the FDA are not actually harmful, especially for athletes. If you're working out a lot, if you're running in the heat, you probably don't have to worry too much. Now, of course, ask your doctor if you're worried, but for those athletes running 5 or more days per week, training for longer events, or outside in the heat, an electrolyte replacement makes a lot of sense. And I'm encouraged by the fact that Navy SEAL teams, Olympic teams, and pro athletes have all started using Elemental electrolyte supplements to improve their performance. Check them out at drinklmnt.com/strengthrunning. You can try their sample pack and get your hydration optimized for the upcoming spring season. That's our show today. Thank you, everyone, for subscribing to the podcast. And as always, if there's anything I can do for you, feel free to reach out at support@strengthrunning.com. Talk to you soon.